In the late 1970s, Ventura County, California, was rocked by a string of unsolved crimes that would leave a dark mark on its history. 3 women, Kimberly Fritz, Velvet Sanchez, and Lorraine Rodriguez, were found strangled. During this time, the California area was gripped by a wave of violent crimes, with authorities aware that other unsolved cases were unfolding nearby. The investigators delved into the circumstances surrounding the demise of these 3 women, and they could not ignore the unsettling possibility that a predatory figure who had managed to elude capture may have been preying on vulnerable victims throughout the area. As the years rolled on, the cases grew cold, but the evidence was meticulously preserved, waiting for breakthroughs in forensic technology to offer new hope. Years would turn into decades, until finally a breakthrough came that would tie these women together in the most horrific of ways. During the 1970s, California was a state of contradictions. With its sun-drenched beaches and iconic scenery, it was a paradise where many families flocked to pursue the American dream. But beneath the surface, a darker reality began to take hold. Crime rates surged, and a growing unease began to permeate the state, especially in major urban areas like Los Angeles and San Francisco. What was once a safe haven for its residents became the focal point for a series of brutal and high-profile crimes that shook the nation. As this wave of violence spread, it seemed no community was safe. There was widespread fear and uncertainty as the headlines told of one horrifying crime after another. It was during this time that the first in a string of chilling cases would surface, starting with the case of Kimberly Fritz. Kimberly Fritz was just 18 years old when her life was tragically cut short. On May 29, 1977, her lifeless body was discovered in a motel room in Port Hueneme, California. The manner of her demise was chilling. She had been strangled with her own undergarments, a method that spoke to the brutality of her perpetrator. Kimberly, who had recently moved to California from Ann Arbor, Michigan, was one of 3 sisters. Her case, seemingly isolated at first, would soon become the start of a much darker pattern, linking her tragic fate to the growing terror spreading across California. Just months later, on September 9th, 31-year-old Velvet Sanchez was found slain in a similar manner. Her body was discovered in a motel in Oxnard, California. Her life taken in the same brutal fashion, strangulation with her undergarments. Velvet had recently left her job in the U.S. Navy Exchange, and she was a mother. The horror continued later that year when, in late December, the body of 21-year-old Lorraine Rodriguez was found dumped along Laguna Road in the Oxnard Plain area. Lorraine, too, had been strangled. A mother of 2 young children, Lorraine was remembered by her family as a loving and devoted mother, whose world revolved around her son and daughter. The discovery of her body marked the third in a series of violent crimes that would leave authorities baffled for decades to come. When the bodies of Kimberly Fritz, Velvet Sanchez, and Lorraine Rodriguez were discovered, investigators were immediately struck by the similarities between the cases. Each woman had been strangled with her own undergarments, and their bodies were arranged in identical, degrading positions. These shared characteristics led Dr. Ronald Kornblum, the coroner medical examiner at the time, to publicly suggest in 1978 that a single individual was likely responsible for all 3 slayings. This theory was compelling, especially in an era when the concept of a serial offender was just beginning to enter the public's consciousness. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the precursor to the modern understanding of criminal profiling, was still in its infancy. And the study of serial offenders was largely uncharted territory. Investigators relied heavily on patterns and gut instincts, rather than the psychological profiling techniques that would develop in the years to come. As the investigation progressed, detectives came across troubling inconsistencies that cast doubt on the theory of a single perpetrator. While the methods of strangulation and body positioning were consistent, subtle differences in the evidence surrounding Lorraine Rodriguez's slaying began to surface. These discrepancies were minor, but raised questions about whether all 3 slayings were truly connected or if the similarities were simply coincidental. These doubts were only emphasized by the limitations of the time. The lack of a clear suspect or strong leads made it difficult for investigators to sustain public interest in the cases. What also added to the difficulties for detectives was the scarcity of witnesses and credible leads. The victims, all of whom were prostitutes, led transient lifestyles that made it difficult for investigators to piece together their final movements. Kimberly, Velvet, and Lorraine came from different backgrounds, but were drawn into a world where prostitute work was less a choice and more a means of survival. They were driven by economic hardship, lack of support, or challenging personal circumstances. The details of their lives are scarce, leaving only fragments of who they were beyond their professions. Despite their deep connections to their families, these aspects of their lives were overshadowed by their involvement in prostitute work, which shaped the limited narrative shared with the public. The stigma attached to their profession further complicated matters, as potential witnesses were often reluctant to come forward, fearing judgment or legal repercussions. Even with the clear connections between the slayings, the cases of Kimberly Fritz, Velvet Sanchez, and Lorraine Rodriguez received little attention from the media. The lack of media coverage not only hindered the investigation, but also reinforced the stigma surrounding their lives. 14 years later, on July 6, 1992, 29-year-old Nona Stamey Cobb was last seen at the Welcome Center on Interstate 85 in Cleveland County, North Carolina. Witnesses reported seeing her get into a truck driven by an unidentified man. The following day, her lifeless body was discovered on the northbound side of Interstate 77 in Surry County, more than 100 miles away. Nona had been strangled, a detail that immediately drew parallels to the California slayings. Like the victims in Ventura County, Nona was a prostitute, and her body had been left near a highway. This was a pattern that told investigators that a methodical and calculating offender was responsible. Given the similarities, investigators initially believed Nona's demise might be linked to Sean Patrick Goebel, who had been arrested in 1995 for a series of similar crimes. But when DNA evidence from her crime scene was tested, it revealed a different story entirely. Goebel was ruled out as a suspect, and Nona's case remained unsolved for nearly 3 decades. The breakthrough in the investigation began with advancements in DNA technology. This provided investigators with a new tool to re-examine old cases. In the case of Nona Stamey Cobb, whose case had remained unsolved, since 1992, investigators decided to take another look at the DNA evidence collected from the scene. Using advanced techniques, they were able to generate a complete DNA profile from the biological evidence found on her body. This profile was then entered into CODIS. To the investigators' surprise, the DNA from Nona's case matched a profile in CODIS, one belonging to Warren Luther Alexander. Warren Luther Alexander was born on January 12, 1951, and his early life appeared quite ordinary. Growing up in Oxnard, California, he attended local schools throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Like many young men of his generation, he enlisted in the military, serving in the U.S. Marine Corps during the tumultuous Vietnam War era, a period that left many veterans grappling with post-traumatic stress and challenges in readjusting to civilian life. After completing his military service, Alexander briefly worked as a taxi driver. This role likely introduced him to a transient lifestyle and frequent interactions with strangers, experiences that would later shape his career as a long-haul trucker. By the 1970s, he had returned to Oxnard and embarked on a trucking career, a profession that would dominate the next 3 decades of his life and provide the means and opportunity for a series of horrific crimes. His childhood in Oxnard, combined with his return during the 1970s, coincided with the timeline of the California slayings. This potentially gave him a local advantage in selecting victims and evading detection. By the time he was living in Diamond Head, Mississippi, advancements in DNA technology led to the connection. This DNA match resulted in Alexander's arrest in March 2022 for the case of Nona Cobb, but the implications of this discovery extended far beyond North Carolina. A year after Alexander's arrest, Ventura County's Cold Case Unit began re-examining the 1977 slayings of Kimberly Fritz, Velvet Sanchez, and Lorraine Rodriguez. This renewed focus involved uploading evidence from the crime scenes into a national DNA database used by slayings detectives across the country. The hope was that advancements in forensic technology might yield new insights or connections. As they meticulously reanalyzed the preserved evidence, investigators hoped to uncover links that had eluded them for decades. This effort led to a match with Warren Luther Alexander's profile, connecting his DNA from Nona Cobb's case to the crime scenes in California. Alexander's DNA became the crucial link that finally solved the cold cases from 1977, bringing renewed hope for justice for the victims and their families. Despite the seriousness of the charges, the Ventura County District Attorney's Office has opted not to pursue the end-of-life penalty for Alexander. District Attorney Eric Nasarenko explained that pursuing capital punishment would extend the timeline of the case significantly, and with aging witnesses, there is an urgent need to proceed. Instead, the prosecution is seeking a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Alexander's legal proceedings were put into motion, with his arraignment commencing in Ventura County Superior Court on August 21, 2024, where he pleaded not guilty. He is currently being held in Ventura County Jail without bail. As the investigation progresses, authorities remain committed to uncovering the full extent of Alexander's alleged crimes. The collaborative efforts of the District Attorney's Office, the Ventura County Sheriff's Office, local police departments, and the FBI shines a spotlight on the dedication to achieving justice. The arrest of Alexander also unearthed a disturbing trend that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, has been monitoring since the early 2000s. As investigators continue to dig deeper into Alexander's past, they are uncovering a history that aligns with the profiles of other identified serial offender truckers. In 2004, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation alerted the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, after discovering a concerning number of women whose lives were taken and then found along highways. This prompted VICAP analysts to examine similar cases across the nation. Their findings revealed hundreds of violent crimes spanning decades, many sharing common characteristics. The victims were predominantly women engaged in high-risk activities such as prostitute work, hitchhiking, or substance abuse. The bodies were often discovered along or near highways, particularly at truck stops or rest areas. The nature of these cases frequently crossed jurisdictional lines, complicating investigations and connections between them. In response to these alarming discoveries, the FBI launched the Highway Serial Slayings (HSK) initiative in 2009. Recognizing the need for a coordinated approach, this program aims to collect and analyze data on highway-related slayings, identify potential serial perpetrators operating across state lines, coordinate efforts among local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, and provide resources to help solve these intricate cases. Since its inception, the initiative has identified over 850 victims and around 450 potential suspects. The identification and arrest of Warren Luther Alexander offer a measure of closure for the families of Kimberly Fritz, Lorraine Sanchez, and Velvet Rodriguez, who have awaited answers for nearly 5 decades. But the investigation is far from over, and the possibility of more victims is unfortunately extremely likely. As authorities diligently continue their work, they are not only pursuing justice for these women, whose lives were tragically cut short in 1977, but also striving to uncover any additional victims who may have fallen prey to Alexander's violent actions. Given the similarities between the California slayings and the case of Nona Stamey Cobb, it is likely that detectives will uncover further crimes committed by Alexander, ensuring that all victims receive the recognition and justice they deserve. A young woman, full of life and on the brink of celebrating her 24th birthday, would have her future stolen in a moment of unimaginable violence. Christin Cassels, a 23-year-old from Hawthorne, Florida's life was tragically taken just 5 days before her birthday. The shooting occurred in the garage of her boyfriend's residence, leaving her family and community devastated by the sudden loss. Her story, marked by love, tragedy, and unanswered questions, remains etched in the hearts of those who knew her. Christin Cassels entered the world on April 25, 1993, in the small town of Hawthorne, born to Randy and Brenda Warnick Cassels. During her school years at Hawthorne High School, Christin was not just a student, but an active participant in various activities. She excelled in softball, weightlifting, and was a dedicated member of the Future Farmers of America. Her Sundays were often spent at Eden Baptist Church, where she was a regular attendee, reflecting her strong ties to her community. After high school, Christin embarked on a career in healthcare, working as a medical assistant. Life in Hawthorne was simple yet fulfilling for Christin, as she balanced her professional responsibilities with her personal life. Yet, beneath the surface of her seemingly idyllic life, an unforeseen shadow was slowly creeping in, one that would soon shatter the peace she had known all her life. On the brink of her 24th birthday, the life Christin had carefully built began to unravel. On April 21st, 2017, what should have been an ordinary evening for Christin and her boyfriend took a horrific and unforeseen turn. The couple had spent the day enjoying the warm sands and calming waves of a Florida beach, soaking in the simple joys of life. As they returned to their Central Florida home, the peace of the day lingered, the kind of contentment that comes after a day well spent. Christin, always mindful of her responsibilities, remembered she needed to grab her scrubs for work the next morning. She stepped out of the car, unaware that her life was about to be violently interrupted. As Christin approached the house, a group of individuals emerged from the shadows, their intentions cold and calculated. They were there to rob the home, and their presence turned the once tranquil atmosphere into one of immediate and paralyzing danger. Christin, sensing the threat, instinctively began to move toward the safety of the house, where her boyfriend was waiting, but safety was a fleeting notion that night. Without warning, the sound of gunfire pierced the air, shattering the silence of the night and the sense of security that Christin had always known. In a desperate attempt to escape, Christin was struck in the back by a bullet. The moment was chaotic, terrifying, and filled with an unimaginable sense of betrayal by the world she had known. The gunfire was relentless. Her boyfriend, shocked and horrified, ran outside in a desperate bid to protect Christin and their home. In the chaos, he returned fire, but the damage had already been done. Christin lay mortally wounded. Her boyfriend, though physically unharmed, was left to grapple with the emotional and psychological scars of witnessing the brutal end of the woman he loved. As the assailants fled into the night, they left behind more than just the remnants of a botched robbery. They left a community in mourning, a family in deep despair, and a future that Christin would never get to live. For years, the family of Christin has been unwavering in their pursuit of justice, determined to see those responsible for her tragic demise held accountable. Leading this effort has been her mother, Brenda Cassels, who has become a vocal advocate. She was tirelessly demanding answers and refusing to let her daughter's memory fade. Despite the passage of time and the pain of loss, Brenda's resolve has never faltered. After a grueling 7-year investigation, their perseverance has finally paid off. The Alachua County Sheriff's Office, working diligently to piece together the events of that fateful night, announced a major breakthrough in the case. 3 suspects were arrested in connection with Christin's slaying, marking a significant milestone in the long quest for justice. These arrests have brought a sense of hope to a family that has endured years of uncertainty and grief. On July 15, 2024, the first suspect, Kenneth Altidore, was arrested in Fort Lauderdale with the assistance of the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Just a day later, on July 16th, Blake Jackson was apprehended in Hollandale Beach, also in Hollywood, Florida, again with support from the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Both Altador and Jackson are currently being held in the Broward County Jail, awaiting extradition to Alachua County, where they will face charges related to Christin's demise. The third suspect, Nikinson Perrin, adds another layer of complexity to the case. Currently serving time in a federal prison in Seattle, Washington, on unrelated charges, Perrin has also been charged in connection with Christin's case. Despite the logistical challenges posed by his incarceration in another state, authorities are moving forward with the case, determined to bring all involved to justice. The detectives continue to work tirelessly, seeking to uncover every detail of the crime and gather additional evidence. As we reflect on the life of Christin Cassels, we are reminded that justice, though delayed, is not forgotten. The arrests in her case bring a glimmer of hope to her family and community, who have long sought answers. Christin's story is a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the relentless pursuit of justice that continues even in the face of unimaginable loss. In the hot summer of 1979, 28-year-old federal worker Vickie Lynn Belk vanished from a bustling DC neighborhood. After years of relentless pursuit and advancements in forensic technology, the chilling truth behind Vickie's tragic fate has finally come to light. Vickie became the first in her family to graduate from college, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree in education from St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina. Her academic achievements paved the way for a career as a management analyst at the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. Outside of her professional life, Vickie was known for her warmth and generosity, deeply involved in her community through Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria. Her commitment to education and community service extended beyond her own achievements, as she inspired others through the Vickie Belk Foundation, dedicated to supporting graduating seniors with scholarships. Tragically, Vickie's promising future and dedication to helping others was abruptly shattered by a senseless and violent crime in 1979. On August 28, 1979, Vickie's boyfriend, James Hill, reported her missing after she failed to return home to Suitland, Maryland, from her job. The following evening, a local teenager cycling through the Bryans Road area of Charles County, Maryland, made a grim discovery: Vickie's body lying just 20 feet off the roadside in a wooded area. Responding to the teenager's 911 call, the police swiftly determined the tragic circumstances surrounding Vickie's demise. The Baltimore Medical Examiner's findings confirmed she had been assaulted and fatally shot, turning what began as a missing person case into a slaying investigation. In Vickie's case, meticulous evidence collected at the crime scene and during her autopsy, including items such as her pantyhose, brown shoes, hair samples, nail clippings, jewelry, bra, dress, and slip, were carefully preserved in storage. Even after the extensive efforts by detectives, no suspects surfaced during the initial months and years of investigation. In the early 2000s, advancements in DNA testing provided a new glimmer of hope. Several pieces of evidence were re-examined, leading to the discovery of a partial male DNA profile on Vickie's dress. But at the time, the technology was still not sufficiently advanced to integrate this profile into databases for comparison with potential suspects, and the case went cold once more. Then, decades later, further advancements in forensic technology finally provide a pivotal lead. In 2022, the Charles County Sheriff's Office utilized state-of-the-art DNA testing on Vickie's preserved clothing. This updated testing yielded a male DNA profile from the DNA found on her dress, a critical development that could be entered into CODIS. This DNA profile was compared against existing records, resulting in a match with Andre Taylor. Taylor had a significant criminal history spanning decades. Following Vickie's tragic slaying in 1979, Taylor accumulated numerous arrests in the District of Columbia. Many of these arrests were for non-violent offenses, with some of them dismissed entirely. One of the most serious incidents happened in April 1989, when Taylor was charged with a violent slaying by DC police for fatally shooting a man during a street robbery. Although he was only found guilty of carrying a pistol without a license in that case, his criminal record was extensive and had at least 10 prior convictions. Taylor's encounters with the law continued into the 2000s, leading to several more arrests. At some point during this period, his DNA was entered into CODIS, which would end up linking him to Vickie's case. On June 27, 2023, 63-year-old Taylor was arrested in connection with the slaying of Vickie. At the time of his arrest, Taylor was living in a DC nursing and rehabilitation facility, coping with failing health and having lost one leg. After a 9-day trial, it took a jury just 2 hours to deliver a guilty verdict on July 18, 2024. On August 23, 2024, Andre Taylor was sentenced to life in prison for taking the life of Vickie Lynn Belk.